Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And tonight we're going to start out with our feature, someone who's definitely had an effect on our culture, Stan Lee, who died recently at the age of 95. And by way of introduction, let's introduce him through The Simpsons.
Stan Lee!
Creator of Marvel Comics?
That's right, the godfather of Marvel Comics. Stan Lee was born Stanley Lieber, a nice Jewish boy in Manhattan, went to DeWitt Clinton High School. I think that makes DeWitt Clinton High School our most popular high school for our podcast subjects, ahead of Roosevelt here in Chicago. And the creator of superheroes such as the Hulk, X-Men, and without question his most popular creation, Spider-Man. He started, along with Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, whose podcast we just did recently, a comic book empire that's become a motion picture franchise empire. Here is Entertainment Tonight on Stan Lee.
For the past million years, all I've tried to do in any writing I've done or any creating any new characters is to find something that I liked.
Marvel Comics legend Stan Lee has died.
When I was originally writing these stories, nobody seemed to care, and people felt, oh, he's a comic book writer, and I was sort of dismissed. If I go to a party, somebody would say, what do you do? And I knew it was coming, so I'd say, oh, I'm a writer, and I'd walk away. Oh, what do you write? Stories for kids, and I'd walk away. What stories? Eventually, I had to say comic books, and the person would walk away. Of course, now it's different. Now it's somebody will be talking over there and say, oh, excuse me, Mr. Obama, I saw Stan Lee walk in. I've got to talk to you. I'm exaggerating a little bit.
Stan began his Marvel legacy when he was just 16 years old.
It was known as Timely Comics in those days. In fact, we didn't change the name to Marvel Comics until the very early 1960s.
It was there his publisher asked him to create a team of superheroes known as the Fantastic Four.
I never thought it would catch on the way it did, but it became an instant bestseller. So flushed with victory, we brought out other superheroes. We brought out Spider-Man and the Hulk and Thor and Daredevil, Iron Man, the Avengers, on and on. They all did well, and we did them all in this somewhat new style of giving the heroes feet of clay and trying to make them react the way real people would react to a given situation. And that was it.
These beloved characters and more have been adapted on the big screen, currently as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where Stan often made cameo appearances.
Hey, Stanley.
Yeah, nice try, buddy. Nice
No,
try.
really, I'm Stanley. It's funny, the cameos, I've suddenly become known as the king of the cameo.
The king of the cameo!
Yeah, I have no competition, really. I'm the only idiot who does those all the time. But they're fun. I love doing them, and I'm very pleased that people ask me to do them.
The whole formula, if there was one, I think, was to say, let's assume that somebody really could walk on walls like Spider-Man or turn green and become a monster like the Hulk. That's a given. We'll accept that. But accepting that, what would that person be like in the real world if he really existed? Wouldn't he still have to worry about making a living, or people distrusting him, or having acne and dandruff, or his girlfriend jilting him, or what are the real problems people would have? And I think that's what made the books popular, but it took years for the competition to realize that, I'm very happy to say.
Here's the BBC4 Last Word with Matthew Bannister and commentator Michael Goldfarb.
The creations of Stan Lee revolutionized the market for American comic books in the 1960s and made millions at the movies in the 21st century. For his company Marvel Comics, Stan created Spider-Man, the Hulk, the X-Men, and the Fantastic Four, to name but a few. He became a revered figure amongst comic fans, making cameo appearances in many of the blockbuster movies that featured his characters. The American writer and broadcaster Michael Goldfarb has this appreciation, which starts with Stan himself, recalling his initial reluctance to have anything to do with comics.
People had absolutely no respect for comics, and I didn't want to be known as a guy writing these foolish little comics, because I thought someday I would write the great American novel.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can, spins a web any size.
Did Stan Lee know what he was starting? Maybe. Maybe not. But he must have known the idea had commercial possibilities. After all, he was working for a pulp publisher. Comics were the starter drug, the way to get kids addicted. We have long since elevated the world of pulp, Frenchified it, called it genre fiction. But pulp and comics were never about art. They were all about commerce. Comic books were what we lived for. Every Saturday in the cubbyhole shop next to the Bala movie theater, selling smoked sweets and every magazine under the sun, I would stop in after the movie to buy the latest comic release. By 1961, age 11, I was already getting tired of Batman and Superman. Boring. Needed something new. Stan Lee, a man my father's age, who already had had a 20-year career writing comics, was also bored.
When I became 40, I said to my wife, I said, Joan, I think I'd like to quit and write something that's a little better. And she said, before you quit, why don't you do one comic book the way you'd like to do it? And you may get fired for it, but so what? You want to quit anyway. So that's when I did the Fantastic Four.
November 1961. There they were. Odd people with fantastic superpowers. The Human Torch, the Thing, Invisible Woman were not bland-outs like Superman and Batman. The following summer came the Hulk. Hulk hooked me on Marvel Comics, but it was an obscure Stan Lee creation, the Watcher, who wormed his way deep into my psyche. The Watcher travels from outer space to watch over mankind and observe its folly, but he is forbidden to intervene and save people. But he's broken that rule from time to time, and yes, 30 years later, reporting from Sarajevo, I did think of myself as the Watcher, and wondered how much internalizing this story had led me on the path to reporting conflicts.
The term superhero, obviously, it means somebody who can do things that the average person can't do, who has some sort of ability that's almost, or in fact, superhuman. Well, if you can combine that with a human identity, and if you can give the idea that he or she doesn't want that human identity to be discovered, it just gives you so many more story angles.
Lee understood the troubled energy of teenage angst better than most parents, and this led to his most commercially successful venture.
I was trying to think of what power could I give a superhero that nobody had seen before. And I saw a fly crawling on the wall. And I thought, hey, that would be great to get a character who could stick to a wall like an insect. And then I thought, okay, what'll I call him? Insect Man? No, that didn't sound dramatic. Fly Man? And then I got Spider-Man. And my publisher said, in his ultimate wisdom, Stan, that is the worst idea I have ever heard.
No, it wasn't. 50 years ago, in creating Spider-Man, Lee set a template for the nerdy anti-hero that is still an essential character in teen films. And today, Marvel is not a pulp fiction factory, but has morphed into a Hollywood studio whose films have grossed billions of dollars. And that's how younger generations know Stan Lee. But they cannot know the time before his creations existed and how important they were to us. It is not an exaggeration to say that for my generation of American males, Stan Lee's superheroes were as important as the rock of the Beatles and Stones. He also directly shaped our politics. As Marvel Comics grew in popularity, he added a feature, Stan's Soapbox, a terse little essay at the back of the book where he could preach. One 1968 essay started, "Bigotry and racism are among the deadliest social ills plaguing the world today. The only way to destroy them is to expose them, to reveal them for the insidious evils they really are." And his characters did that. Stan Lee was more than just a creator of comic books. He was the creator of a world where people like you and me, just ordinary neurotics, could be heroes.
Well, we're going to move on now to David Pearson, who died recently at the age of 83. One of the two great stock car NASCAR racers, along with Richard Petty, of our generation. His 105 combined total wins are second only to Petty's. David Pearson was a native of Spartanburg, South Carolina, and here's Spartanburg Television to talk about his career.
And Spartanburg native David Pearson has passed away.
Yeah, 7 News reporter, sports director Pete Yanity gives us a look at the 83-year-old Hall of Famer's life.
David Pearson was one of NASCAR's transformative figures in the 60s, taking the sport from its grassroots of moonshine runs and beach racing to big tracks and giving it national appeal. Known as the Silver Fox, he became one of his sport's most visible stars for a decade and a half, and perhaps the only mark against his career was its timing, as it paralleled Richard Petty's, who drew more attention than anyone else. Pearson's 105 wins are second only to Petty's 200, although Pearson had the upper hand in perhaps NASCAR's greatest finish ever when on the final lap of the 1976 Daytona 500, he went by Petty on the backstretch, then blocked a late pass attempt by the King. The ensuing collision left Petty's car undrivable, while Pearson limped across the finish line for the victory. Pearson won 3 Grand National Championships, and his 113 poles also ranked second all-time to Petty in that category. Some eyebrows were raised when he wasn't an inaugural inductee with Petty into NASCAR's new Hall of Fame in 2010, and he was an obvious choice for its second class a year later, gaining enshrinement, appropriately enough, with his longtime friend and Spartanburg-based former owner Bud Moore. Perhaps getting a separate year to go in away from the King gave Pearson the center stage he rarely enjoyed when the two often raced door to door.
Road and Track had a nice tribute to David Pearson. At a time where many of NASCAR's brightest names fell into familiar roles as heroes or heels, Pearson transcended categorization. Tough and determined on the racetrack, Pearson's hard-edged persona as a competitor was balanced by the warm respect he earned from fellow legends and champions. Heartfelt reverie expressed by contemporaries and next-generation drivers alike followed the South Carolinian from NASCAR garages to his second career in broadcasting. As Pearson's teammate for the Daytona 500 in 1969, Mario Andretti would come to appreciate the full measure of his gifts and character. He was so smart, and I've always rated him as one of the best I've raced against, Andretti told Road and Track. The thing that's very important when I reflect back on him is the year I won Daytona. The longest battle I had was with him. It was around mid-race, and we were going back and forth, and I could almost see him laughing because it was good, clean fun as we passed and repassed each other lap after lap. We were testing each other to see who's got it, and that was the highlight of the race. It was a very competitive and busy race with others, but with him, that's where the race took place. On top of that, looking at his accomplishments and so many wins that he had, it speaks for itself. Andretti's fondness for Pearson extended beyond the high banks at Daytona. I loved his demeanor, Andretti continued. He was so even-tempered. You never knew when the tiger was going to come out of him. He was not one to boast or seek the limelight, and to some degree maybe he flew under the radar compared to some others in the press, but you could never take him lightly. He spoke very loud when he was behind the wheel. He was that kind of guy. I always liked him, and that's why I'm so sad that he's gone. He's only 83. He was a good, good man. David Pearson, not the icon Richard Petty was, but a NASCAR legend in his own right. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps, and we're going to close tonight with Douglas Rain, who died recently at the age of 90. He was a Canadian trained Shakespearean actor, but he's best known for one role. And in that role, you never even saw his face. Based on his diction and inflection, Stanley Kubrick selected him to be the voice of Hal in the movie 2001. And his voice, coupled with that electric eye, is one of the most memorable and menacing performances in motion pictures. So to close tonight, in honor of Douglas Rain, we're going to play a little bit of his famous encounter in the movie with Keir Dullea as the astronaut threatened by the new technology. We did a little of this in the Marvin Minsky podcast that I'll refer you to. After that, a little bit of the Blue Danube, because besides knowing how to use voice actors, Kubrick could use classical music like no one else in his movies.
You read me, Hal? You read me, Hal? Hello, Hal, do you read me? Hello, Hal, do you read me? Do you read me, Hal?
Affirmative, Dave. I read you.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.